I think it's really important to understand about Fletcher Hanks and the history of comic book making in particular is that most of the guys who were making comic books, it was part of an assembly line. You know, they realized that if they're going to fill up these comic books with 52 pages every month, they'd have to work faster than one guy doing everything. And so one person would do the script and hand it to the next guy who'd do the pencil, hand it to the next guy who'd do the inking, hand it to the next guy who'd do the lettering. You see, I'm saying guy. It's true. It was a male-dominated industry. And then over to the printing plant to the colorist. And by the time there, the scriptwriter was already working on the next story. There's a very efficient way to make comics. It also produces a lot of really terrible comics to this day. Fletcher Hanks was the first comic book auteur who wrote, penciled, inked, lettered his own work, and I believe notated the color on his own pages as well. So, you know, his work is the work. It's the work of one person is always going to be more powerful, more interesting, and than the work that's been watered down by many hands. And so you're getting not just like the way this guy draws, but you're also getting the way this guy thinks. And I hope that now that you can understand the story of what kind of human being he was, when you read some of the stories in this book, there's going to be a certain resonance that occurs that will deepen your appreciation.
So the comics aren't all credited to Fletcher Hanks. There's this sort of wealth of great pseudonyms.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how you stumbled on him initially, and then how did you begin to do the sort of detective work to go, well, wait a minute, this guy? Goofy name, this must be another one by that Fletcher Hanks guy, and what's the real name? How did you decide that?
Well, that's a good question. The first time that I saw his work was when I was the associate editor of Raw magazine, and we reprinted one of his stories. The cartoonist Jerry Moriarty, who has, by the way, a fantastic new book on a table over there called Jack Survives, and you should look at this book and buy it. He has a fantastic eclectic taste, and he dropped by a stack of Fletcher Hanks comics one day to the Raw offices, and we were like, which one are we going to reprint? It was sort of an instantaneous decision. And the one we reprinted was the one with the gravity ray with those bodies floating in space. But that story is signed Fletcher Hanks. Back then, cartoonists would sign the different names for because they were working for a bunch of different companies. And the impression that you had, the publisher's impression was trying to create the impression that they were hiring a lot of different artists, where in fact they were hiring maybe 5 different guys to draw 20 different stories. When we saw the name Fletcher Hanks, we compared it with some of the other names there: Barclay Flagg, Charles Netcher, Henry Fletcher was one. And we looked at all these names. It was obvious. It's obviously done by the same guy. You know, the way that all the villains had that thrust bottom lip and the kind of this matinee idol lick to the eyelash of the hero. But we didn't know which one of these was the real name because he had been completely overlooked in any of the histories of comics. Well, maybe one. There was a reference to him, but we couldn't tell who his real name was. So we figured, well, Fletcher Hanks, that couldn't be his real name. It's got to be, who would be named Fletcher Hanks, right? So I think Art just said, well, this is probably Henry Fletcher sounds like someone's real name. So in that issue of Raw, we credited it to Henry Fletcher. And that's that was his official name from 1982 to 2006. Everyone thought Henry Fletcher. And then, as I say, I found the contact name for the son and met the son and realized this guy's name was really Fletcher Hanks.
How did you reconcile the artist with the obviously bad human being that he was, or at least what changed for you? Before that, you just saw the artist, and you appreciate the artist. Then you started understanding what the human being was about. And you had mentioned that you had a deeper appreciation. But how did it manifest itself, and why?
Yeah, that's a really interesting story because it was shocking to find out that this guy who was like one of my cartooning heroes was, an utter bastard. So what happened was when I met the son. I went to meet the son, and as far as I was concerned, this old guy, the son of Fletcher Hanks, was just sort of a hazy wall in between me and a stack of original art. And all I had to do was sort of claw my way through this wall, and there would be a treasure trove behind it. And so I went down and met the son. I was like, yeah. I sat through lunch with him. He took us out to lunch, and I had to like listen to his World War II stories, and I'm kind of getting impatient. When am I going to, where's the art? Let's see the good stuff. And I was just listening to his stories, and by the cup of coffee, I was really kind of getting interested. He did what? The son did what? He flew over the Himalayas, supplying fuel to Chiang Kai-shek. This was like one of the most difficult missions, dangerous missions of the war. You had to fly at night. You had to fly in the worst weather so that the Japanese wouldn't shoot you down, because your cargo ship was filled with tanks of gasoline. He made this trip 238 times. On top of which, he was. Then finally, he's telling me about. Oh, and he's an inventor. That lap pool that you see in the advertised in the New Yorker. He's the guy who invented that. Somebody stole that invention from him. He came up with several other inventions. So was a world-class athlete. He started the first triathlon in the state of Maryland. And then we get back to his house, and I start hearing about what a terrible childhood he was. And I left out a bunch of stuff here. He was abused so badly by his father that his teachers thought he was mentally retarded. He could not speak. He could not speak in class. He had to have a buddy of his sort of interpret for him because he was so emotionally traumatized that he couldn't speak. So what's happened during the course of this interview with the son is that he stopped being this foggy haze of distraction and turned into the haze came together, and a real human being was created who is heroic. So I went in there thinking that the father was my hero and the son was just, chopped liver. And then the tide turned, and by the end of the afternoon, whether he liked Reagan's diaries or not, the guy is one of my heroes. So there was some sort of reconciliation there. Any other questions? Speak now, or what is one more?
Yeah, Paul, I'm interested in, you talked about Fletcher Hanks wanting to be a cartoonist.
Yes.
I imagine that means that he wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist. Knowing that at the time, with the kind of speedy work that was being done, there was all kinds of swiping going on, artists stealing from other artists. Was there anything in all the work you've looked at did you see any influences or swiping from, Foster, Gould, Caniff? Is there anything of that in there, or is he so singular, as it appears to be, that he's only swiping from himself, which seems to occur now and then?
This is a good question, Mr. Mazzucchelli, the cartoonist asking the cartoonist question. There's that picture that I showed you of Fantoma where she's flying in and her breasts are sort of, dangling in the wind. Do you remember that one? It's memorable. I'm surprised there's not a lot of people saying, oh yeah, I remember. That's a drawing that is definitely swiped. I don't know where it's swiped from, but he drew that same drawing of the swooping female figure with the pendulous breast at least 3 times. There are certain drawings in his work that are clearly drawn from photographs, and those ones bounce way out. But in terms of swiping from prominent cartoonists of the day, I see there's a couple of drawings that I think look like they come from maybe an illustrator, but I don't see anything almost every other cartoonist of this period from early 1940s, the comic book artists who were doing the superhero work, they fell into 2 camps. Either they swiped from the Flash Gordon artist Alex Raymond, and Hal Foster, the Tarzan Prince Valiant artist, or they swiped from Milton Caniff of Terry and the Pirates, and you can see the swipes just jump right out. With Hanks, it's much, much murkier. I think if he swiped from anyone, it might have been a couple of illustrators of the day who were maybe pulp illustrators. Definitely work from photographs, and those panels just leap right out at you. Yeah, another question.
One other recurring motif that